Hi, welcome. Today I'll be in conversation with Steve Mayo. I'll be using notes. Steve, if you have anything you jotted down, feel free to take a look at them. Steve is a former president of the Connecticut Ornithological Association and has been active in hawk watching at Lighthouse Point in New Haven since 1987. Since 2007, he's been the site coordinator, setting up the schedule and recruiting volunteers to lend their eyes and expertise to the count. Steve also collates and submits the collected data to the Hawk Migration Association of North America, the governing body of hawk watching. They are a not-for-profit founded in 1974, and their mission is to advance the scientific knowledge and promote conservation of raptor populations through study, enjoyment, and appreciation of raptor migration. The watch begins late August and runs 7 days a week, 7 a.m. to as late as 5 through November, depending on the weather and if the hawks are still migrating south. Some days end earlier if there's no activity or bad weather. Last year was my first time participating in Hawk Watch, and I got hooked very early on. I have a very long way to go in terms of identifying what I see, but it's fun, it's challenging, and I've met some really great birders. So I'm just going to start by defining hawk, since that's our topic. Hawks are daytime raptors or birds of prey. Owls are raptors too. According to the Audubon Society, raptors have these specialized adaptations: exceptional vision to see prey from afar, sharp talons to grab prey, and a hooked upper bill to tear food. So there's a little bit of background, and so now let's get started. Hi, Steve. Welcome, and thank you for joining us for this conversation about Hawk Watch.
Thanks.
So here's a question we're going to be asking, in our conversations, which is, what got you interested in birds and birding?
Well, I've always been interested in the diversity of nature, and birds. There certainly are a very diverse group of creatures.
Yeah.
There's about 450 that have been sighted in Connecticut alone. And when I was a kid, I'd be delivering newspapers and I'd see American kestrels, falcons, nesting right on the streets of Wethersfield. And but suburbia isn't the best place to see a lot of birds. I do remember going on vacation to New York and seeing at a town pond a American coot,
Mm-hmm.
which is kind of like a rail-like, duck-like bird. And I once saw a black-crowned night heron in a willows on the Little Chazy River feeding into Lake Champlain. And I was able to look these birds up and see them in a field guide. And I was amazed at them because I thought only ornithologists could possibly see these birds. I didn't understand that if you go to a variety of habitats or go to special migration points, you can see an incredible number of birds.
Right, right. So did you have a specific interest in raptors that led you to Hawk Watch?
Well, from then, about 15 years went by, and I was out on the mudflats of New Haven misidentifying shorebirds, and this old gentleman from the New Haven Bird Club walked up, saw my binoculars, and started talking about the bird club. Mm-hmm. And he said, there's going to be a book signing at the Hawk Watch. And he was talking about Brian Wheeler's new book, The Peterson Guide to Hawks. And Brian Wheeler's a resident of Connecticut, or was at the time. So I went down to Lighthouse, and it was one of those September days when there were 200 or 300 birds pouring through for the day, and they were coming in at shoulder level. And I remember like an 11 or 12-year-old boy there is going, there's a Sharpie, and there's a Sharpie, there's another one, and there's a coop. And I was amazed because I might have seen this type of hawk darting past the windshields of my car once or twice in my life, and certainly never identified them. But from that day on, I was hooked. So that was somewhere around September of '86, I think it was.
Okay. Now, so hawk watching is all about migration. And when the hawks go, the other birds go. So can you just explain what migration is? Because that's really the foundation of hawk watching and a lot of bird watching.
Sure. Well, nature, of course, abhors a vacuum, and the northern United States has an incredible variety of food, insects, and food during the summer months. In the wintertime, that special food goes away. So birds will migrate thousands and thousands of miles to take advantage of of the northern climate for only a few months a year to nest and breed.
Hmm.
And then when winter hits, they are relatively specialized birds. There's not a lot of food around, and they head back south to southern United States, Central America, South America, and where life is a lot easier.
Right.
So that's kind of um, why migration happens.
Okay. And so really a lot of the birds that, you look up, you see, they're beautiful. They're only here for a few months. They're here for 4 months or, just a short period of time. So, yeah, so you've got to have the timing down, I guess, for the right viewing. So there are other birds. So we talked about the hawks, but there are a lot of other birds that go through Lighthouse Point as well.
Sure, there's tens of thousands of birds going through during the season. First, you get your neotropical migrants, things like hummingbirds and flycatchers and um, orioles, warblers, but other birds migrate as well. People don't realize that chickadees and blue jays that they see in their winter feeders might have come from the frozen north where
Right.
things are a little tougher in the winter. So Connecticut is actually a
Mhm.
good place, a better place, a more hospitable place to spend the winter.
Right.
So we see hundreds and hundreds of blue jays pouring through on their way to the mid-Atlantic states or wherever they're going to have an easier winter.
Right.
Uh, so yeah, that's so Lighthouse is really full of migrating birds throughout the
Yeah.
whole season.
Now, some hawks do stay year round. Is that
Yeah, some of the bird hawks that move along with these neotropical migrants down south do head out, but Cooper's hawks especially have been really taking advantage of the fact that people are feeding birds,
right?
and they will stay around. And
Right.
I'm sure I don't know exactly which hawks are where, but I'm sure we're getting northern hawks from during the winter. So things like red-tailed hawks and red-shouldered
Right.
hawks. So
Right.
red-tailed hawks are the ones you see on the phone poles when you're driving down the highway. You see a big
Right.
blob up on the telephone pole, and that would be a red-tailed hawk.
Yeah.
They they perch and wait for just a tiny vole to move around, and they're able to see it and catch it.
Yeah. I know my I-95. That's usually a red tail hawk you see sitting on the lights, and I know part of my commute I see osprey on I-95 sitting and waiting. They're usually near water, but yeah. So it's a sight. It was fun when I found out what kind of hawks those were because I never had any idea. So Lighthouse Point is considered one of the best hawk watch locations in New England. So what makes it special? Why do so many birds go through that point?
Yeah, it's got to do with the topography and the shape of Connecticut. On a strong north wind, the birds will blow down to the coast, and they don't want to cross the water, the Long Island Sound. So they head west, just like if we want to commute to Florida, we're going to head west on I-95.
Right.
And when they hit the New Haven area, they see the water on two sides. They see that wide New Haven harbor,
Hmm.
and they kind of congregate there. They're hesitant, and they really do kind of linger there, and that's why we see so many of them over Lighthouse. It's really a bottleneck, and
Hmm.
it's interesting because you don't see that to the east because there's not a lot of New England real estate out there for a lot of migrants to pour through.
Right.
And you don't even see it in the west. You don't see it a mile away in West Haven, so we don't even see the hawks coming towards us if you were to stand in West Haven. They just kind of disperse and disappear.
Right. So they have this little narrow corridor, I guess that
Yeah,
they
a
go.
little
Yeah.
geographical bottleneck. Cape May's the same way. It's a big, huge peninsula over Delaware Bay, and they have the same situation. We're kind of like a little Cape May.
Yeah, and I've got to get to Cape May sometime. I've only heard good things about it. So there are some other Hawk Watch sites in Connecticut. So what can you tell us about those a little bit?
Yeah, they have some unique properties as well. The other fully staffed full season hawk watch is called Quaker Ridge in Greenwich, and
Hmm.
it's on top of a glacial hill about 8 miles north of Long Island Sound. And this hill is on the end of a very long ridge of mountains, of low mountains. And the hawks come down this corridor, this ridge. They deal with updrafts and thermals. and they come pouring down the ridge and right over Quaker Ridge. So it's a really, really good to see place to see hawks and other birds.
Right.
Their specialty is broad-winged hawks, and these are kind of like neotropical migrants. They feed on insects and amphibians and occasional small rodent.
Uh-huh.
And then they head down to South America and live on lizards and things. So,
Okay.
and they pour through in big numbers. When they go in a very short period of time in September, and they ride thermals. And thermals are bubbles of big drafts of warm air. Right. And they're non-social flocks. They form non-social flocks. And they swirl around in these thermals and go higher and higher up and take advantage of these currents and then soar down to the base of the next thermal. And this way of migrating is very energy efficient. Right. And it's an amazing thing to see. Yeah. So we have other HawkWatch sites that are exclusively for looking at broadwings. And these are places like Botsford Hill and Chestnut Hill and Litchfield. Middle School in Torrington, Botsford Hills in Bridgewater, and they're open for a few days during the course of a couple weeks mid-September when the broadwings are coming through.
Okay, I'll have to keep an eye on that schedule. That has me intrigued.
And the weather.
Yeah, the weather. Okay, so that leads us to the next question, which is how do the hawk counters know when to show up? So how, it's a little bit like clockwork, but how do they know, it's time?
Migration is a really dangerous thing, and it's very labor intensive. So the birds do take advantage of north winds, and they want that tailwind to head south. And so on these other sites, I explained light northerly winds, passing cold fronts, really great. So in general, north winds are good. Right. For Lighthouse, we want to see really nasty north winds. We want to see really powerful winds. The ideal situation is around Columbus Day weekend, maybe early October, with maybe some blocking weather. And blocking weather would be like a tropical storm or southerly or easterly winds that block the migration. And then if there's a front that goes through up in the northern Great Lakes, right, and it goes past Lighthouse, and you get 20 mile an hour winds. Yep. It gets real crazy at Lighthouse. Right. So it doesn't happen every year, but it happens frequently, and it often happens around early October. And when that happens, people know about it. They call in sick from work, and they show up at Lighthouse, and the parking lot will be filled with hawk watchers.
Right. Okay, don't tell my boss. Maybe she won't watch this. I might not show up. So when I started participating in HawkWatch last year, I was excited about, I was seeing so many things, all the raptors and even other birds. But the people that had been volunteering there a long time weren't quite as excited. They were pretty disappointed actually in the numbers. There's, lots of stories about when they couldn't even keep up with the number of birds and hawks coming through. And that wasn't, even though I thought it was really cool and I liked the numbers, that wasn't the experience. So I'm going to read a quote from the journal Science, and this is from a study that came out in 2019. Since 1970, North America has lost more than 2.9 billion birds. In less than half a century, the avian population of the continent has declined by some 29%, or more than 1 in 4 birds. As someone who was a little bit indifferent, I guess, to birds before I started getting out there, now I understand what that means. That was a huge study. So what can you tell us about the raptor migration when you started observing in 1987? Have you seen, does the study make sense to you that you've seen the numbers go down?
Sure. Yeah, when I talked about the great days of October, we still get 500 or 600 birds in a day, and that's great. But in the 70s, we would see 20,000 hawks in a year, and now our seasonal averages are more in the 5,000 to 8,000 range. Right. So it really has gone down. So there are still good days, but they're not as frequent. Okay. And there's a reason for that. And any kind of species decline there's this ecological acronym called HIPPO. H stands for habitat destruction and loss. I
Mhm.
stands for invasive plants and invasive insects. P stands for pollution.
Okay,
The other P stands for population, in other words, overdevelopment, human
right.
population. And then O stands for overharvesting or overhunting or
Okay,
overfishing.
okay,
Um, and so not every one of these parameters affects every hawk, but these are the reasons why we lose hawks and birds.
okay.
Um, Even overhunting, you don't think of that with hawks, but remember in the 1930s, um, people used to just senselessly shoot hawks
Right.
on the ridges in Pennsylvania. And there's an infamous spot that became Hawk Mountain, which is now a sanctuary and one of the more famous hawk watches in the Northeast United States.
Right.
Uh, so just to give you some examples of the kestrels that I saw as a kid and delivering newspapers, um, those there seems to be plenty of breeding habitat, but there's other issues going on. There's insecticides that are
Mhm.
causing problems.
Right.
There are clearly problems with their migration, their coastal migration route. So there's
Mhm.
not staging areas and migratory areas, and
Right.
they have seriously declined. Um, Sharpshin and Cooper's hawks, Sharpshin hawks need very big expanses of unfragmented forests,
Right.
and they need places where there's lots of birds. So the birds that you mentioned that are declining,
Yeah.
because the birds are declining, because the food's going, the hawks are going.
Right.
Osprey, as you know, and eagles were subjected to DDT and another pollutant.
Right.
Uh, and another example of population and development loss would be maybe a northern harrier, where
Hmm.
these birds breed in coastal marshes, large marshes, or
Right.
very large fields. And of course, if you drain the marshes, or you put farming into the fields, you develop the fields, you put in Walmarts, then there's not a lot of habitat for them.
Right.
So these are the factors that cause these birds to decline.
Right. Now you mentioned ospreys, and some now, of course, there was the DDT issue, but now there are ospreys and eagles are doing well. It had been pretty dire there for a while. Any thoughts on how they're thriving or what's been done for them?
Yes, yes. Some hawks are much more tolerant of human disturbance, and ospreys and eagles in Connecticut are just booming.
Yeah.
They're filling up every niche, every location. They're almost colonial in the numbers that are nesting. So there are some good examples and some good signs there.
Right.
Um, Peregrine falcons is another example where they nest on buildings and bridges down in
Mhm.
Fairfield County, and they still, of course, nest in their traditional historical cliffs and other nest sites like that.
Right.
Uh, we mentioned the Cooper's hawks and how they come by in feeding stations, and they seem much more tolerant of
Right.
people.
Yeah.
Even though they're very similar to sharp-shinned hawks, they don't seem to be declining. They seem to be doing okay.
Yeah. And I sometimes have a Cooper's hawk that visits here, and I do feed birds, and it is a bird feeder. It doesn't that's very vague. It just doesn't say who it's feeding, which kind of birds. Sometimes it's a hawk. Um, so so what are the wider ramifications of the decrease in the hawk population? And how do they contribute? Like, I guess why do we care even if we're not into hawks? I guess.
Yeah, hawks are really good ecological barometers. If you're seeing a decline in the hawk population, there's a decline in environmental quality. They're the apex of the food chain, and they also control rodents and small mammals.
Hmm.
So hawks and birds in general are really good barometers for environmental quality.
Okay. Um, So, what hawks do you usually do we all usually see at HawkWatch, and does it change over the course of migration? So, if HawkWatch starts really Labor Day, are there different hawks you're going to see at different times, or are there patterns to that?
Sure, and there's peaks for each species. That's the unique thing about Lighthouse is that it's got an incredible diversity of hawks. In mid-October peak season, there's days when you're going to see 10 to 13 species in one day
Yeah.
and several hundred hawks total.
Hmm.
So yeah, the season starts late August if there's a cold front. Um, And it starts with the osprey. We go down and we watch the osprey. We want to count them, and we'll see them heading southwest over Long Island Sound. And then 10 minutes later, an osprey will show up with a fish in its talon. So we take it off the list.
False migration. It wasn't really leaving yet.
Um, and so osprey actually just cut out the beginning of September. They start really going, and we certainly count them then. Kestrels and sharp-shinned hawks start going through in September. October peak is really Cooper's hawks and merlins, and a variety of birds, including the non-hawks.
Right.
And then you get into early November, and that's when turkey vultures and red-shouldered hawks and red-tailed hawks start going by. Okay. And so, we might even go the first week of December if there's a cold front.
Right.
You can imagine what that's like. A cold front in December is a lot different than a cold front in August. Yes. You have to be a little more hardy for those cold fronts. Being out of an exposed parking lot for 4 hours in the freezing cold you have to be as hardy as a hawk, I guess.
Yep, and die hard about the whole thing. Yeah. So let me see here. And you did, I know when we were talking about this, you had once had a zone-tail hawk there you were talking about. It came over right during, every year there's a migration festival. And so that was just a cool thing that you'd seen. I don't know, when was that?
That was during the Migration Fest. So there were hundreds of people to see it. That was back in 2015, I believe.
Yeah.
And there are a bunch of other hawks that we see small numbers throughout the season. The Swainson's hawk that was mentioned earlier in one of these discussions, and goshawks, northern goshawks, golden eagles from the west. So we do get a variety of birds.
Yeah. I'd like to see a golden eagle. That would be nice. Okay. Do you have a favorite hawk or viewing experience you want to tell us about?
I've got too many.
I know that's a real softball, but let's hear it.
There's been all kinds of scenes at Lighthouse. There's been Cooper's hawks chasing a squirrel around a Jersey barrier. There's been goshawks that come by and pluck a flicker right out from under our noses at the watch. We watched a peregrine falcon get harassed by a ruby-throated hummingbird for an eternity, for minutes. It's just amazing. We showed up once at dawn, and there was a barred owl teed up on the sumac in the fog, and the fog had lifted, and the owl didn't realize that it was sitting out in the open for everybody to see. We short-eared owls go head south mid-morning.
Right.
Those are owls that are very rare to see, but they are daytime migrants.
Right.
There's just so much, thousands and thousands of dragonflies heading northwest at once. Dragonflies do migrate, and we barely know what's going on with them.
Right.
Almost annually, we get cave swallows. So they start in Texas. For some reason, they get, weather permitting, they get blown up into the Great Lakes region. They head over to the Maine Maritimes. They head south along the coast to Hammonasset. Somebody will call us at Hammonasset in Madison, and 45 minutes later, the cave swallows are at Lighthouse. And that's almost an annual occurrence. So there's so many migration phenomena that occur at Lighthouse.
Yeah, and there is an excellent telephone tree for someone sees something, someone relays it, and then there's a lot of running around. So that's I think part of the fun. So this is all just very exciting for bird nerds. So if someone decides they want to try and visit the Lighthouse Point HawkWatch, what should they know? What should they bring? How does that work?
Yeah, first of all, weather is key, right? So we love to have visitors when you're sweating at mosquitoes and it's foggy or it's sunny and it's a great beach day, because nobody's going to be there except for the hawk watchers, except for the counter. But show up on a strong north wind. Show up and tell the gate guard that you're just there for the hawk watch, and they'll let you right in, so that you're not paying out of town beach fees.
Yep.
And that you just come park right up in the parking lot. It's in the middle of the field, in the middle of Lighthouse Park. There's a lone tree and a picnic table, and you'll see some cars around, and that's where we are. Binoculars are critical. If you have a spotter scope,
Yep.
that's helpful. But if something comes into view and it's rare, we certainly share the spotter scopes and let people
Yep.
see these amazing rarities that come by.
Yep, very gracious group. And social distancing. It's easy to do at the HawkWatch, so might make it hard to share things, but yeah, but it's a great opportunity. And you also usually you'll see like scopes on tripods silhouetted on the hill, so so you'll find the HawkWatch people.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we call it the hill
yeah.
because usually hawk watches are on hills. We're probably about 20 feet above sea level.
It's a mound. It's a Hawkwatch mound. So here's a few more questions we've been asking people. So there's something called the life list, and that's a list of all the birds you've seen in your life, and everyone keeps their list their own way. But so what's your number? You've been birding for a while. So how many birds have you seen?
Yeah, I don't keep a real bona fide life list. I probably have seen 1,000 birds. I don't travel too much. What I do keep is a very formal Connecticut list.
Yep.
So my Connecticut list is 327.
Uh-huh.
And that's over 30 years, including probably 10 years of actively chasing birds
Yeah.
uh, through, the old days with phone trees and pagers and everything else. Um, so think about that, 327 birds over 30 years. I had gone years ago to Costa Rica, and I saw 435 different species in 12 days. So it just goes to show you the diversity of the tropics.
Right.
But Connecticut still has an incredible diversity. As I said, 445 species, I believe, that have been seen in the state. And you could
Yep.
very easily see half of them during the course of a year, no problem, just with
Right.
minimal effort.
Right. Just you got to get out there. That's all. Okay. Three top spots to bird here in Connecticut.
Well, yeah,
We
you can
can't count
tell.
Costa Rica. Yeah.
You can tell I like the big numbers, the splendors. So I would go to Lighthouse. I didn't mention, or I might have mentioned the grackles.
Yeah.
In early November, the grackles just pour out of the East Haven horizon like smoke,
Yeah.
and crazy numbers. 50,000 to 100,000 would be like nothing to see that.
Right.
So I like um, uh, the big shows.
Yep.
So I would say Lighthouse is up there. Milford Point in August is
Yep.
great for shorebirds and the spectacle of peregrines chasing shorebirds and things like
Yep.
that. And again, big numbers. Lighthouse October's time frame. But I should probably pick a spring migration spot, and I would definitely say River Road in Kent, where
Mhm.
you could tick off 100 different species within a few hours in
Right.
that general area. It's an incredible place.
Yeah.
Beautiful place.
And that ties in, I always talk about how those first couple of weeks in May, that's migration time. So start getting ready, start learning your birds, get your equipment, that's the place. But yeah, River Road is wonderful for that. So yeah, so you'd mentioned the season. So yep, so each season brings its own thing. There's, I hadn't realized, but birding is year round. If you want to do it year round, there's plenty to see. So yeah, it's good to know those different locations. Okay, top three birds you've seen.
Oh, they have to be Connecticut birds, I guess.
Whatever.
Gyrfalcon in West Haven in the 80s, a boreal owl in Middlebury, a Chuck Will's widow, which is like a whippoorwill, which is a very rare bird from the South. I was able to re-find it again, phone calls back in the good old days, and I refound it in Lake Wintergreen and saw it, which is pretty amazing for that kind of bird, a very, very discreet, elusive bird. So that was amazing. I could add a fourth in terms of finding a bird on my own, or at least with people at the time.
Yep.
I was doing a Christmas count with a couple people from the HawkWatch, and one of them found a little green flycatcher, and we immediately realized it was a mega rarity, and made a couple calls. And 20 minutes later, half of the Connecticut birding community was at this little Granford Elementary School yard in December,
Yep.
looking at this little green flycatcher. And we knew it was one of two very rare California flycatchers. And it actually pooped a couple times. And somebody was able to recover the droppings of this tiny droppings of this tiny bird on these tiny leaves, and were able to take the leaves and submit them to Cornell for DNA analysis. And so we were sort of responsible for the first state record
Yep.
of Pacific Slope flycatcher in Connecticut in 2015 in a cold December day, which is just a crazy story.
So it took a village and science to get that one figured out. That's a great
Right.
story.
I tell my family and friends and they don't believe me.
Right. I'd say it's a good like CSI for birds. You know, you had to get the evidence. That's a great story. So we've been focused on new birders and introducing people to birding. So again, as an experienced birder, what are any tips for new birders, people thinking about it?
Yeah, birding's a very social thing, and you will advance your birding skills geometrically by going out with people and birding
Yeah.
with people, finding an expert, going on social media.
Yeah.
When the pandemic, of course, breaks, there's a ton of calendar events.
Yeah.
Certainly in birding, you can maintain social distancing, and it can be done safely with relative acquaintances, and
Yeah.
no problem at all. And
Yeah.
even if you're birding with a novice, you can
Yeah.
talk through different things, and
Yep.
you will learn so much more than if you're birding alone.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. And I enjoy both, but the benefits of birding with someone experienced is obvious, but even again, a novice, just, and half of it is just being out there and, again, running ideas against people. And then you both get home and you're both looking it up and texting and trying to figure out who you should text who actually knows what they're doing. So it's it's a thing. It's very immersive, I would say. So anyway, well, that ends this conversation. I want to thank Steve Mayo very much for joining us. So HawkWatch is going to start, in about a month, where today is August the 3rd, I think. Yeah.
The end of this month, yes.
Yes. Okay. So I'll be ready and you work on your schedule and we'll all get ready. So anyway, thank you very much, Steve Mayo. And thank you everyone for watching. Thank you.